So here you have this phenomenon, monarchy, which could either be the worst form of government or the best. And it all depends on whether you give these people any real power or not. So you might say then, like, why would we possibly want to have these, family up there? And what possible good could it do us to have them if they have no power? And here, there's a couple of phenomenon I've observed, which I think might explain, why these are very good and stable systems. So one thing is if you have someone whose job is to embody the nation. Queen Elizabeth is probably the best example that people would really recognize. Yeah, she was queen for so long. She embodied the United Kingdom. And, multiple generations of citizens of that country would think about, the queen and where she was in their own lives and things like this. If you've got someone who does that, it puts a ceiling on populism. It's very interesting that we have Donald Trump. The United Kingdom had Boris Johnson. But he didn't get very far at all, because there's no way he could make that claim, which we do hear from Trump from time to time, that he alone embodies the people. He's the only one who senses what the people really want. You can't say that if there's a king or queen. Those folks actually embody the nation. And so I think that puts an upper limit on populist appeal.
Wait, Tom, can I just stop you? Because I understand what you're saying, but I guess there is also a part of me that's like, how is that possible? So how can you have, like, just taking the British, I think is the one we're most familiar with, the richest, most out of touch family that's living in what you have acknowledged is like a really fancy prison. What is it that they're actually embodying? They understand what, random cobbler down the street needs. So what is the, because I think you are getting at something that's important, although I don't think it's actually that they know what the people need. I think it might be something else, but I want to hear what you mean when you say that the royalty in a constitutional democracy are embodying the people.
Tradition. That's what they are embodying. You're the one who brought up the cobbler, so I thought it was it is the sense of being British. That what binds us all together with all our different plural things is that we share this experience of being under this system with these people. Now, in the United States, we have something that substitutes for that, which is a constitution.
Yeah.
But that's very rare. There are very few countries like ours. And so, if you don't have that, and particularly think about like an ethnically divided society, or one where there's a significant minority group, the king can really help integrate people and give them a sense that they're all part of the same country.
But I think that's so fascinating, because what you're saying is that in a constitutional democracy, the royal family substitutes for a national identity, or like defines the national identity. Whereas it's part of the national identity, and it could be in the UK, the national identity seems to be, or at least for some people, like something about tradition and holding on to history and continuity. Whereas in the United States, there also was a national identity. I'm not sure what it is now, but there was a very strong national identity, which was embodied in the Constitution, which was reflected in the way that the country was founded, which I think also was reflected in an embrace of immigration and difference. And, all of these things, work hard and things will happen. Like, there was a national identity that made it so that we didn't need a royal family to tell us what it was. We had another source, right?
Yeah.
What other sources of national identity do countries get? Because I'm trying to figure out like what it is that the royal family is actually doing, and whether or not a state needs the royal family to do that.
Yeah, so here the idea that the king is the ruler of all of the subjects is really important. That can integrate people who otherwise might not be part of the country. I used to live in Thailand. I've spent a lot of time in Thailand. And Thailand's actually a very plural country, even though Thailand means the land of the Thais. The Thais are only one of the ethnic groups there. It's a Buddhist country, but you have a significant Muslim population in the south. You have these hill tribes in the north who are different ethnicities. And basically all of those people, even though they're not Thai, they're not members of the main ethnic group, they can signal their loyalty to the country by being loyal to the king. and the king protects them. And that's a very old historic role. You see that in a lot of different countries. It's, just in this regard, I was looking at Europe in World War II, and it turns out like the countries that were monarchies were much more protective of their Jewish subjects than republics. Like France basically served them up on a platter. The king of Morocco, which was a French, protectorate at the time, refused to give the country's Jewish population to the Vichy French, who wanted to deport them. And that's because he said, no, these are my subjects. I have to protect them. So there's like a bargain, you might say, between minorities who otherwise would not ontologically be part of the nation and the king. So I think that's one thing we get. I think another thing you can get is that, if the king is not involved in day-to-day politics, but is up there sort of above it all, then occasionally a king or queen, I should say, can step in and say, wait a minute, you guys are getting a little bit out of control here, you politicians. Get back in order. You can't do this. And we don't really know much about what happened with all the prime ministers' meetings with the Queen, which are so well documented in that Netflix series, The Crown.
Yeah.
But if you're to believe that, those conversations were real, and from time to time, the advice, as it's formally called, of the Queen would actually steer things in one way or another. At least according to that series, she prevented a coup. There's a famous story from Spain when the monarchy was restored after Franco in 1978, and a couple years later, some military officers were trying to have a coup, and the king played a major role in defeating the coup. He got on the radio and said, no, we have to stick with democratic government. So that's a role also, which I think, people might want, this idea that there's some kind of emergency lever that can be pulled to prevent the country from, completely falling apart when the politicians can't get along. Oh, yeah. So let me say a little bit about Republican systems and how they get this function. We're a presidential system. We have presidential elections, or these kind of winner-take-all elections. They create incentives to have these hyper presidencies. And there's a long literature in political science which says, presidential systems aren't very good. There's a preference for what are called parliamentary systems, where you elect the Congress and then they choose who's going to govern the country. But even in those systems where you have a prime minister, like in the United Kingdom, you don't need to have a queen or king. But you do need someone who serves as head of state. So those systems always have, someone who's the head of state who's not the prime minister. And in many countries, that person is called a president. Italy, for example, elects old, retired politicians who are seen as wise to occupy this seat called the presidency. And they do have some impact. They're supposed to take the long view of the system and make sure that the rules are basically followed and stuff. So I think that's an achievable thing for the United States. We could have a prime minister. We could move to a parliamentary system. And a lot of people have suggested this, that it might be better. We would probably have a more divided set of parties, but it would depend on the electoral rule. It has long been said that minorities would do better under a parliamentary system. If we had a parliamentary system in which you had all these different things, the Democratic Socialists and the Liberal Democrats and the Conservative Republicans and the Never-Trumpers and MAGA, and they were all running these different parties, then they have to cobble together some kind of coalition. You would need someone to serve above all that as a president. And those people typically have longer terms. They serve for 8-10 years. And, I could see something like that in the United States. Maybe we'd elect someone everyone liked for that role. Oprah or something like that.